Had to be able to answer that question that occurred to me when I first saw those pictures of the dead.
Author Mark Bowden's search for answers would result in the 1999 bestseller Black Hawk Down. To write it, he would have to visit a country in Africa, considered one of the most dangerous places on Earth.
I came to the reluctant conclusion that really the only way to tell this story well would be to go to Somalia. And the idea, was frightening to me to go there, frankly. So I began by calling the State Department, and I said, I'm planning to go to Somalia. Can you give me any advice? And he says, yeah, I'll give you some advice. Don't go.
With no government and no laws, Somalia remains a country in name only. Months after the tragic incident, Bowden would place his life in the hands of the very militias who desecrated American soldiers.
The city of Mogadishu, as we approached it, looked like it had been trampled by giants. It's a city where there were few structures intact. Things had not just been destroyed, they were like pulverized. Roads strewn with trash and debris and blown up cars. Nearly every major structure has been destroyed. The few exceptions to that are mosques with their minarets. And it's because Islam is really the only thing in Somalia and Mogadishu that's held sacred. One of the most frightening things in the world is a 10-year-old with an automatic rifle. You see a lot of that in Mogadishu. Virtually every male is armed. The most appropriate line about Mogadishu that I'd ever read was that everything that guns can accomplish has been accomplished in Mogadishu. And I just saw the truth of that.
Gripped by famine, Mogadishu's greatest hope arrives in 1992. The United Nations focuses its relief efforts on the drought-stricken Horn of Africa. For the first time in modern history, the world shows it cares about the suffering people of Somalia.
The factional fighting in Somalia had gotten so bad that huge numbers of people were starving to death.
No food, no peace, just everywhere is violence.
Both the civilian side of the Bush administration and the military side concluded that there's no other way to get the help there except to use the U.S. military.
President George Bush Sr. Intervened in 1992 at the urging of the UN to end the famine in Somalia. And toward that end, 20,000 United States Marines landed on the beaches of Mogadishu in December to be greeted by hundreds of photographers from around the world who photographed and videotaped their struggling up on the beach.
Under Operation Restore Hope, the mission of the U.S. Marines is to ensure the distribution of food to the desperate Somalis. Shipments intended for the starving are being seized by gunmen loyal to Somalia's rival clan warlords. The most formidable of these warlords is Muhammad Farah Aidid.
He was one of those who was actively involved in seizing international food shipments so that he could feed his gunmen before starving children were fed in the interior of the city. He was a person with a tremendous amount of power and savvy. He was also ruthless. He used violence, obviously, against his enemies, but even to keep his own clan in line. He didn't shrink from using starvation as a weapon against his enemies.
Among the American soldiers bringing aid to the starving is the warlord's own son.
I came back to Somalia 8 December 1992.
Sent to America for his education, Hussein Aidid had become a U.S. citizen and joined the military.
I was proud to be a U.S. Marine with my best friends. I served very well and I received 2 medals.
Over the next few weeks, the Marines succeeded in opening up all of the truck routes and warehouses and delivering food, and basically ended the famine in Somalia.
And we delivered the needed assistance very quickly and saved millions of Somalis. And we all felt proud.
With the famine alleviated, the U.S. Marines are replaced by a multinational United Nations peacekeeping force.
And it was at that point then that efforts were made to form a cooperative coalition government amongst the warlords who had been fighting with each other, so that when these military forces were withdrawn, the situation wouldn't just deteriorate again into famine. The problem was that almost all of the warlords were eager to cooperate in this coalition, except for the most powerful of them, Mohammed Farah Aidid, who had designs on ruling Somalia. So for him to agree to cooperate with people who he expected to defeat was something that he had no intention of doing. Basically, he laid low through the period when there was this huge military presence in Mogadishu, but literally the day in the spring of 1993 when the Marines were withdrawn, Aidid launched an offensive against his enemies and also began sniping and setting off mines, killing UN peacekeepers. So Aidid, over the course of the spring and early summer of 1993, managed to become an outlaw.
It appeared that if we could cut the head off the political side and the military side of Aidid's forces, then we could bring harmony to the city.
In their initial efforts to catch Aidid, the UN launched a number of raids into the city that resulted in a large number of Somalis being killed. The UN was pursuing Aidid. They were gradually turning the people of Mogadishu against the UN intervention.
When they first came, we were very, very happy. The UN and the Americans were helping people. The problem started when they started to go after Aidid.
The Americans were interfering in the affairs of the Somali people.
The helicopters would come in low over our houses, terrifying the children.
It was a United Nations operation, but we knew that the executive power behind it was obviously the United States.
The same effort, the same mission that had been received with open arms in December of 1992 began to be perceived as an invasion, as a foreign invasion, particularly among the followers of Mohammed Farah Aidid.
With hostilities against America growing in Somalia, the U.S. military begins preparing its special forces at Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Turn to your left, fire double tap.
In a mission codenamed Gothic Serpent, Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, and Air Force Commandos begin joint training for a potential showdown with Aidid.
Once I get to Fort Bragg, then I get a better understanding of what the actual mission statement was.
UN food shipments were getting hit, and basically the guy responsible for it was Aidid.
Our objective there was to go and capture Mohammed Farah Aidid and also dismantle as much of his key infrastructure as possible.
Training alongside the Special Forces is America's premier combat team, a top-secret unit known as Delta Force.
A unit that's so secret the Army doesn't acknowledge its existence.
I'm not really sure what I'm allowed to say about them, actually.
The existence of Delta is neither confirmed or denied by the American government.
As a former Delta operator, Wayne Long was well aware of the capabilities of Delta Force.
It is a force which is given special operations tasks over and above Special Forces, over and above the Rangers.
Lee Van Arsdale spent 11 years as one of America's secret warriors.
We have a group of individuals, fairly small by military standards, that are specially selected and trained to do the jobs they do. Going much beyond that, I'm going to go into classified territory, which we won't do.
What they specialize in is targeting individuals and finding them and arresting them.
They're really absolutely the best shooters and assaulters in the world, bar none.